What's the story, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So last week a lot of you guys were asking for a character collage animation breakdown, so that's what we're going to do today. I'm basically going to be going through these two effects right here. So one of them is a bit more of like a traditional style of collage animation, very hard cutouts. And then the other one, we're going to be using a video and we're going to have a bit of a play around with a collage style animation using the video. So this is something that you're into, stick around. Yeah, let's just jump right into it. The first technique that we're going to break down, I'm going to put the actual creator of this in the description below. His name is Troy Brown. Basically, I've seen this on his Instagram and I just thought it was a really interesting way of doing collage animations with a character. So first things first, we're going to be just getting like a 3-second clip of your subject in frame. That's basically all you need for this. So here is the clip that I'm going to be using. As always, all the project files and everything for this will be in the description on my Patreon. So let's just jump into it and get going. So the first thing we're going to do is come over to After Effects and let's put in a new composition, and we can call this, main comp scene 01. And it's a 1920 by 1080, and we can just make this maybe like 5 seconds. Now what we're going to do is just drag and drop our clip in here, and it's just of this DJ doing his thing. What I'm going to do now is basically use the roto brush tool just to kind of cut him out initially, and then we're going to go back in and mask out on top of that. So let's get into roto brushing this out. So double click on our clip down here. We can just actually rename this to say main clip, and we're just going to come up here now to our roto brush tool and just select in and around our subject. Don't worry about getting, for example, these DJ decks in here. It's more just the hands and just his body that we really need. So just going to come around and try to make sure that I have everything as good as we can get it. Great. And then just a H there. And then we can just come over to our feather and let's just feather this out a good bit. Don't be worrying if there's some of the bits that are sticking out like this, because we're going to be cutting it out when we're masking it in the next stage. So just come by now frame by frame. You can do that by holding control and using your arrow and just making sure that your mask is doing its thing. So this girl's arm is just actually getting caught here. So let's just remove that on frame 1 and then it should just be fixed. Yeah, grand. Great, we have everything. So next thing we're going to do is just press freeze here. That's basically just going to lock all those rotor brushes into place. Then you don't really have to worry about it. Right, amazing. We can come back now to our composition and you'll be able to see that he is fully masked out. And yeah, his ears are kind of doing a mad thing, but don't be worrying. We're going to mask that out, as I said. So what we can do now is let's just right click this and we're going to just pre-comp this. We can call this main person. I'm going to bring in a posterized time here. So let's just make an adjustment there, call it frame rate, and then come up to your effects and then let's just drop a posterized time. I'm going to make this like 6 frames per second. So that's 4. I'm going to make this like 6 frames per second. That kind of just a few less frames to play with, which is good. So for now, I'm just going to trim our comp to be this length. And let's just give this a nicer color just so we know what we're working with. Grand. So now we're going to start cutting some of the elements out. And this is probably the most time-taking part of this whole effect, but I think it's definitely worth it in the long run. So let's just get our pen tool and come over to our main person. And let's just make a mask here around his hand. Try to do it in as few points as possible, but obviously you need some of those. You need some of the main points, but yeah, just means that this won't take forever. For now, we're just going to come to our mask, select our mask here, press enter and call this hand L. And we're just going to make this to none, just so you can see what's going on. And then let's just set a keyframe. Now what we're going to do is basically just adjust this every few seconds, trying to just make sure that we're getting everything that we need inside of that mask. So this finger is pretty important, and you can still be pretty rough with this and leave some of the bits cut out that you don't need. Right, so just to make sure that that's all looking good, what we can do now is just duplicate this person and we're going to call this hand_L. For this mask, we can subtract it, and because we have it here, we can come down to this mask and add. This mask now is being controlled by this layer, and now what we can do is just come up and you can either press Y, and we're just going to move that anchor point to the base of the hand. And we can just increase the scale here now a good bit, and we get something like this. You'll see that there's some little black points here that are not really working with us. So I found the best way to do this, rather than keyframing it, we can just go Control-Shift-D. And then on this next one, we can just actually move the position to where we actually want it. So something like that. And then just keep going forward. And then we're gonna press Control-Shift-D again. So it's somewhere like that. And we can increase the scale as well a bit. And just adjust that position. So now we're getting something like this. And that's all looking pretty good. So now what we're going to do now is just, we can hide these two layers. And now we're going to do the exact same for this other hand and his head. So I don't know if you need me to walk you through that step, but I'm going to fast forward it so you can still see what I'm doing. But yeah, that's basically where we're at. So on that same main person there, we can leave these now and just let's give them a different color, so we know that the left hand is going to be that blue color. And on this main person there, we're going to make another mask. Grand. And now we can just call this hand underscore right and just set a keyframe, and then we can work forward, add another point here, just so in this next frame, when his finger comes down, we can just adjust this one just to get his finger. Then we're just going to work back and make sure that this is all looking good. So this hand is pretty stationary, so actually kind of moves relatively quick through it. Grand. So same process now. We're just going to duplicate this one, bring it underneath that hand, keep it underneath that hand left, because that's where it's positioned. And then we can just call this hand underscore right. And on this mask now, we can hide this for the time being and just see what's going on. So we can subtract it here and then enable this hand right layer. And now we can just get that anchor point, bring it down to where we want it. We don't need this hand left on this one. And now we can just scale this. I'm going to enable these other two hands just so we can see how everything is looking. There's just one frame here that we're kind of missing out on, and I'm just going to come back to this hand left, and on our mask I'm just going to make sure that this is going to be over his hand. The thing about this process is it does take a while, but it's the only way that you can do it when you're working with videos. So it's just one of those processes that, yeah, kind of just has to be done. Now we're just going to come back and just kind of fine tune this just so we make sure that we have everything in the right place. Right, that's looking much better. So last thing we're going to do is just that head. And yeah, that's basically the main part of this whole thing, is making that head a funny scale just so it kind of looks like there's a bit of perspective on it, right? So let's just do the exact same thing on that main person. I'm just going to give this hand a different color as well. And on this main person, we're going to come up, get our pen tool, frame one, let's just do a rough mask. So I'm just going to make this fairly rough, and I'm just going to come around that collar line here, and I'm going to cut out that ear as well. Just so we can see what we're working with, we're just going to come up and hide all these other layers. And also in these masks, we can just set this mask to none here, just so we can see what we're doing. So let's just call this head, give it a keyframe, and let's just keep masking this out. So I'm just using that black part of his collar as kind of the indicator here of what I'm trying to follow. Right, so we've done now that mask for the head, and we can do the same thing, duplicate it, and let's call this head. We can just have this on subtract, and that's basically going to cut out anything that we've done. And then on this head now, we can just come over, get our anchor point, put it to his neck, and then we can scale this up. Oh, I forgot again just to delete these other things that we don't need and put it as add, and that means now we can just scale this up, and we can just place this somewhere like that. So now we're getting something like this. We can just enable our hands as well, and you can kind of see the effect now that we're getting. Yeah, so that's looking really good. So last thing we're gonna do before we kind of style this up, we're just gonna add in this image of the DJ decks. So this is basically from the same video, but I've just got a screenshot from when his hands are fully off the decks. We can just come up here with our pen tool and just do that rough kind of cut as well around this. Just come around, and now we have that cut out like that. And we're just going to place this underneath our main person. So now we have him, and it looks like he's kind of playing with the decks. Now it's time to kind of style this out a bit, and first thing we can do is just group these hands in a pre-comp, and let's just call this hand_L. So now we have everything all neat. Let's just come up and get a black and white effect, and let's just drop this on this layer, and we can just see what we're working with. I'm going to drop it on the head layer just so I can really see what's going on. So you can play around with this, style it out however you want. We can just copy and paste that now onto all of our other layers. Great. And now I can add in a levels and just crunch this a bit like so. Copy and paste this onto our other layers. And now we can just come up and make another adjustment layer underneath the frame rate, and let's just call this noise. And then we can add our grain. We're just going to make this final output and Kodak vision, and let's just increase the intensity to something like 1.2. Yeah, that's going to slow down the render a good bit, so let's just hide that for now. Don't really need to be seeing it. What we're going to do is just do our black and white and our levels, put it onto these decks, right? And now let's just give this a new background. So let's just go solid. Yeah, let's just give it that nice orange texture. What we can do now, just so we can fill this little gap here from his body, we can just give it a little shape layer. So you can be pretty rough with this. I'm going to do something like this. We're going to just change this from a gradient to just a normal fill. And in our color settings, we can just try to match something here. Let's just drag it and drop it underneath our main person and underneath our decks. Right, so something like that. We can just try to match it to this. Right, so there's a bit of a hole there. So if we can just bring this up a bit further. And once we have our noise on here, you'll see that everything kind of starts to blend in and you don't really even notice it. We can just also come to our path, give it a keyframe, and just animate this a tiny bit just to kind of add in with the flow of how he's moving. Right, that's looking really good. So what we can do now is just select everything that is attributed to our person. Let's just hide the decks and bring it underneath that shape layer for now. And then let's just give this a null, and we can just scale this down a bit just to see how everything's looking. And I'm just going to increase this left hand a good bit. I can just change that location, and just at these points here I'm going to just do the same thing. I'm just going to split and just adjust that hand just so it matches up like this. Let's re-enable our decks here, bring it underneath that shape layer, and come back to this null now, and we can just increase that scale again just so everything is looking good. And then let's just bring our position up a bit. Just adjust this shape layer down. Right, I think that's looking a bit better now composition wise. We can just hide this noise again just so our computer can run normally. Now let's just style out these decks a tiny bit. So let's just pre-compose this and call these decks. Great. And then inside here, we can start playing around with this, right? So I want to give this a bit of a wiggle, so we can just go Control Alt Home, and we're going to go rotation, Alt on it, and then we can go wiggle, maybe like a 2 and a 3. So then these are just wiggling around. We can also give it position, so let's do a position, wiggle, 2 and a 3. Great. And then we can just increase that scale a tiny bit, and let's just bring it up. Rotation, a 1 and a 2, just so we're not getting any of those white bits. Yeah, that's looking good. And now what we can do is add some, let's add a bit of color to these switches. So if I hide the black and white here, you'll be able to see that there is some color to these. So let's just unenable that black and white for now. And we're going to just add in a shape layer. We can make it a gradient, and let's just do something like this where it just wraps around like that and go full circle. And then we can just come up to our tool here and come down to our gradient tool. And then this just allows you easily adjust how you want this to look. Something like that's looking good. Just bring this down a bit. And then we can just link this to those decks. We can just come over and let's just reduce that opacity a bit. And let's give it a glow. We can just reduce that as well. Just turn on our black background just to see how bright this actually is. Something like that, so it's leaking out a bit. On this opacity now, we can just alt click it and let's just give it a wiggle, and maybe something like 20 and 20, just so it's flickering a lot. Come up and we're just going to add a fastbox blur, and then we're just going to kind of feather out these edges. Right, that's looking good. And then back in our main scene now, you can kind of see what's going on. So we can just turn on our black and white again. And then let's just increase the opacity of this. Great. And then obviously with our noise on it, it's going to look much better. Lovely. That's all looking really good. You can obviously add in a load of different little, maybe a few leaks in the background here. So we can just duplicate this shape layer, bring this up, and then get our pen tool, come down to our path here. And let's just maybe give this something like that, and then we can duplicate that, Control Alt Home, rotate it, and then we can just give these both position, wiggle, and maybe something like 3 and 7. Right click this, copy expression, and then just paste that onto that. Right, so let's hide the grain for now, and what we're going to do is just select all of these layers, even our decks, and we're going to right click, pre-compose these and put them into our main person. So what we can do now is just make this a 3D layer, right? We're going to give it a scale, we're going to give it a position keyframe, and then we're going to give it a X rotation keyframe, right? Press U just to see all of them, and then bring it on a few frames. Now we're just going to zoom in, focus on his hand, and we're just going to change this rotation a bit like that. And let's just turn on this noise just so we can see a bit better what's going on. Lovely. So that comes in like that. And we're just going to give this a keyframe, easy, just to ease it in. And what we can do now is just right click, new adjustment layer, and let's just give this a fastbox blur. Call this blur, and we can just come up, get this eclipse tool, and just do a mask, maybe something like that on his hands. We're going to set a keyframe here, and then we're going to increase this blur when it's here. Let's just come down to our mask and invert it, and we're going to just add a lot of feathering to that as well, and we can just reduce that blur a tiny bit. Lovely. Press U and let's just see what's going on now. Great. And then around here, select all of these keyframes. Right, before we do that, let's just give this that easing. Select all these keyframes, Control C, Control V, right click, and then we're going to just time reverse these keyframes. So that it zooms out and you're getting like a nice little perfect loop. Right, so just to extend that now, we can just select this blur, our main person, and we can just right click, pre-compose, main comp. So we can just come up now just to extend this out a bit and just make this, or let's just go 5, and we can just select this layer, duplicate it, right click. We're going to come up to time, reverse time, and then bring it to the end, and just drag out these two. And then we can just set that to there, and then just drag out this bottom background there. Great. So now you're getting a perfect loop. And that is basically how you do that effect. Obviously, spend a lot more time masking stuff out. I kind of have to rush through that part just so I can get this video done in a reasonable time. So yeah, that is the technique number 1 for motion collages. Let's jump into the next one right now. So let's move on to something a bit more traditional, kind of like the style you'd see in A$AP Rocky or A$AP Ferg's music videos. So first thing we're going to do is jump into Photoshop, and let's just make a new file, right? I'm going to make this 1920 by 1080, and I'm just going to drag and drop in some of these images here. So I have this Dennis Rodman one and this A$AP Rocky one, right? So let's just load them in, and we can actually just hide the Dennis Rodman one for now, and we're going to just work with this A$AP Rocky one. So just scale this down a tiny bit, and we're going to start just cutting out his hands and this chain here. We're going to use this polygon lasso tool, and it just helps when you want to have those really hard cutouts. So let's just start off now by coming up and just taking this arm. You can kind of cut this out in whatever style you want. I'm going to cut out kind of some of the tops of his fingers just to have that really sharp edge. Great. And then we can just loop this back around, select it, right click, and we're going to do a new layer via. Before we can do that, we just have to right click this, and I'm going to just rasterize it. And then I'm just going to do a new layer via cut, because we don't really need any of this. So grand. Just going to come back up into that lasso tool, and you can kind of see those details are just looking really nice and the way they're cut out. So just going to come back up now and do the inside here. Great. And then same again, select this layer, and we can just delete that. Now we can just come back in and get these last bits and just cut them out. So right, so we have that cut out now. Now what we're going to do is cut out just this chain, and then we're going to use generative fill or the content aware fill feature just to fill in the bits that are going to be missing on his thumbs. So let's just do that. So we can just do a large selection here. Just going to right click, we're going to do a new layer via cut. We can just hide that, and we can just call this chain. This is going to be the hands, right? So any of these loose pieces, we can just come up here to our lasso tool, which might be a bit easier, and just get rid. So delete, delete. Right, so these are the little gaps here that I'm talking about that we're going to have to fill in. So I can just get my pen tool, just come up and just link all these like this. I'm going to just do them in 2 parts just so it looks a bit better. So make selection. We're not going to really see this, so let's just try the content aware fill tool and let's see how it does. So that's fine, because we're literally only going to be seeing it for 1 second, or not even a second, like a 0.1 of a second. So that'll do fine, and we're just going to come up and do the same here. We just hide this just to see what we're working with here, and we're just going to make sure that this is all like sharp edges as well. Grand. So now we have our chain on one layer, and we have our hands on another layer. And all I'm going to do now is just select these, new layer via cut. This is going to be hand left and hand right. Great. Now let's just bring in this Dennis Rodman photo, and we can just have our hands here just to see what parts we want to cut out, right? So let's just bring it somewhere like this, and I can just hide these now. Come get my polygon lasso tool, and I'm just going to do something really similar, really hard cuts here. Great. New layer via copy, and we can just delete this other layer. Now we have something like this. We can just come in here now and maybe just cut out some of the features that we kind of want to enlarge and just give it that collage kind of feel, right? So let's just do these shades. New layer via cut, and we can just mess around with the scale of these, and maybe we can just warp them a bit as well and just play with them and see, try to get something that you're liking. So something like that, nothing too major. And then I'm just going to cut out his nose here just so I can fill in this gap. So new layer via cut, and then we can just bring this up, and I'm going to replace his mouth in After Effects. So last thing we can do is probably just this staple piece here, this hair, and maybe we can blow out the saturation and stuff on this just so it really pops, and then we can make everything else like a black and white. So let's just do something like that. So right click, new layer view, cut. Just make sure your right layer is selected, and let's just call this hair, head, and nose. Just come to our hair, and we can just maybe resize it a bit, make it a bit more boxy. Just press enter, and let's just see how everything is looking together. Right, that's all looking really good. So now you can either grade this in here, or you can bring it into After Effects and do what we did doing that first effect. Let's just see how everything is looking if we grade it in here. Just might save us a bit of time. So image adjustments, and I'm gonna do something similar. Black and white. You can just adjust this to how you want it. And let's just apply that to the other layers as well. I'm actually not going to apply it to the hair layer. So for this hair layer, right, I'll do the other ones first, and then we can come back to that hair. So black and white, looking good. And actually I'm going to leave the shades as well, because they're kind of a standout point. Right, so for this hair, I'm just going to come up and let's just do some adjustments of hue, saturation. Let's just bring this all the way up so it's something a bit crazy. Yeah, don't want to change that too much. And we can also do something similar with those shades. So come up, adjustments, hue and saturation, make them pop. Great, I'm just gonna add a noise here, just across the board, something like that. Now we can just do that for everything else. So filter and noise, Alt Control F just to paste that on. Right, so that is basically, so now we have all of our layers. So now we can just save that out as a PSD. Inside of After Effects, let's just come up and make a new composition. And this is going to be called main comp scene 02. Great. Let's just bring in that PSD. We're just going to press OK and just drag and drop it into our composition. And there we have everything. So come over here and we're just going to uncomp this. As you can see, everything has came in perfectly. And now we also have a null that connects everything, so you can play around with it. But yeah, we'll come back to that. First things first is I want these two hands basically to start close and then come out like that. So to do that, we can just select both of our hands and let's go in a bit and maybe give them a position keyframe at around 1 second, right? We can just bring this in and bring this in. I like animating when we have the posterized time in, just because it gives you kind of a better idea of how everything's looking. So we can just go frame rate, same thing as the last effect, posterize time, and let's give this something like 12 frames per second. And that's what you're getting, right? I'm just gonna select these, give them some easing. Nice. And now we're gonna have this chain kind of reveal behind these hands, right? So we're gonna have it placed behind the hands initially. So then this comes up and then it's gonna settle in front of the hands around here. So what we can do is come up and we're gonna get our puppet tool and let's just give this some little pointers. We can just hide these two hand layers just so we can see where this begins. Now we can re-enable them, come back to the start and then select these and let's just bring them in. Something like that. And then that just gives it a nice little chain animation. We can just select these and give it that easing. And all we're going to do now is just, because we want this chain now to show in front of the thumbs, we're just going to split that layer and put this one on top. So then it goes like that. Change the time of that a bit. So let's just Control Z and maybe here it comes up on top when there's a bit of movement. There, and that's a bit more seamless like that. That's looking good. Now we can select all of our components here. Control A, press U, and then let's just select all of these. Press P, and we're gonna just give these a wiggle. So let's go like wiggle, and maybe like a 2 and a 3. You can increase this to how much you like it. Maybe like a, see how crazy this is. So I'm just gonna leave it at 2 and 5, and I'm gonna copy expression, select all of our elements, and press Control V. And then they're all doing something crazy. So what we can do, just to, don't really like those cuts being shown on the head. So what we can do for the hair, we can just come down, delete those wiggles, and then just get it to a place where you like it. And then we're just gonna link that hair to the head. So then that's just gonna be staying in position, right? So now what we're going to do is bring in a video of a mouth basically singing or screaming or talking, and and then we're going to comp this into this scene, right? So I'm just going to drag and drop the footage that I have, and we can just scale this down a bit. Right, so if we were just to mask this out here, you'll see that, I'll just show you that the mouth, let's just do a rough mask. If we're just to place this here, you'll see that the mouth is just going all over the place, and it's coming out of frame, and yeah, it just doesn't look great, right? So what we can do is just, let's go and delete that mask, and let's just center this like this, and let's just bring it up a good bit. We're gonna come over here to our motion panel, and I'm just gonna go stabilize motion, and we can just make this a bit bigger, and then we're just going to track something like this part of his tooth. Just come back to the start and just make sure that that's on that. Then we can just hit this play button. That's just going to motion track that, and then we're going to be able to just lock that into the center of the screen, and it just makes life a lot easier and kind of adds to the effect as well. Great. So now what we want to do is just come over here and press apply and hit OK. This is just staying in place, and now when we mask it out, it'll just stay in the center of the screen. So what we can do is just right click, pre-compose this, and just call it teeth. From here we're going to mask out where we want. So I'm just going to do something like this. I'm going to get half of his mouth like this. Control Alt Home just to center the anchor points, and then we can just scale this down any way we want it and just position it somewhere. So we're going to put this underneath our nose here, and let's rotate it and scale it up a good bit, something like that, right? So now we're going to duplicate that, masks, come down to our mask here, and let's just drag this down to the bottom half and make it a bit bigger. Bring this up a bit just so we're getting all of those teeth in. Right, so now we're getting something like this, and this is all looking really good. Let's just duplicate these out a few times so we can actually just pre-compose these, so we have them both in the same layer. Duplicate them out a few times, select the bottom one, click the top one, and then we're going to just keyframe assistant and sequence those layers. Yeah, don't worry if they go over a bit, that's fine. Pre-compose it one last time just to keep everything neat. Yeah, now we have something looking like this. Right, just to kind of take this to another level, all we're going to do is just close all these down, right? And then I'm gonna make sure that this background isn't linked to anything, and then we have everything else linked to this. So once I scale this, everything's getting scaled, right? Just have to link the teeth. So once I scale, everything is being scaled. So this comes, and then around here we're gonna do a scale keyframe, position keyframe, and a rotation keyframe on this master null. Press U, and then we're going to just come forward a bit, and we can just scale in to his teeth like that. So we're getting something like that, and let's just give that some easing just to see how it's looking. Right, amazing. And then at this point I'm going to want the head and the teeth to basically come in front of that chain, right? So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all the layers that are related to his head, right click, pre-compose, and call this head. And now we just have to link this to that master null, so then everything is basically the same. But then at around here, we're going to want this head to basically Control Shift D. We're going to split the layer, and we want this to come in underneath our chain. So then it goes something like that. So it's a bam, bam, bam. Great. You can just bring down the position on this a bit as well. Scale it in a tiny bit closer. Right, and just give those both the same easing. So then we're getting something like this. Lovely. So now let's just add in a few little things. We're going to add in another adjustment layer, and this is going to be called blur. We're going to just drop in a fast box blur on top of this. Set a keyframe around here, and then around here we're going to want this fully blurry like that. We're just going to give this that same type of mask like this, and we can just feather out this mask and just invert it just to see what we're getting. It just puts more focus onto the teeth and kind of just makes everything look a bit more cinematic, right? So then we can just ease that as well, and then that'll give us something like this. Amazing. Now, if we want this to loop, all we're doing is just selecting these, and we can just Control C, Control V, right click and reverse keyframes, and then that'll just go back to normal. Right, that's looking really good. Obviously, you can do so many other little things here. For example, you could have his shades kind of flickering here, which could be a nice little touch. You come in here, shades, you can duplicate them. You could have some, let's say, brightness. Just increase the brightness a bit, like that. And then you can just apply a wiggle to this, maybe like a 10 and a 20. Let's see how that's looking. Yeah, and then back into our scene 2. Yeah, kind of get the gist. So many different little things you can do with this. So that's basically the second technique for character animation. Obviously, incorporate that into so many different styles as well. It doesn't have to just be this super cut out version. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. I think those 2 character collage animation effects are super useful, and you can make some really nice videos with them. So as usual, everything will be in the Patreon down below, and yeah, thanks for watching. Cheers.